good to see you without a crutch.
I know, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It didn't get me up here any faster, did it?
So let me call this meeting to order. This is the business meeting for the month of November for the Board of Education. We were in executive session at 6:30 to discuss collective bargaining, and this is our open public session. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? The flag's back to you. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we start, I just would ask for a moment of silence. Two folks in our community who passed away. One, an employee of ours, Darlene Budimar, who was working in the Coda Counseling Center as a secretary and spent a lot of time in the district in the high school east and west for many years. And her daughter Lauren is an English teacher at high school east. And also Richard Mills, who a district resident, former commissioner of education for 14 years. A lot of things words used to describe him, but one was highly ethical and focused on kids. And over time, occasionally Commissioner Mills and people in education didn't always agree on things, but he was somebody who was approachable, and it was great to have him live in our district as well. So if we just take a moment of silence to remember that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Could I have a motion to adopt an agenda? Christina, second. Deanna, all those in favor? The agenda is adopted, and we'll move forward with Board of Education comments and reports. Who would like to go first? Cameron, do you have some? You're leaning forward.
Cameron.
You're leaning forward.
Sure. Awesome. So
Cameron is for people who don't know, Cameron is our student representative on the board. We started this a couple years ago, and Cameron's the second person that we've had in this position. And actually, I was just thinking this the other day. You cycle out probably the end of December, right?
yes, and so that's one of the things we've been working on is the successor. We have several candidates. We held interviews last week, and we hope to be making a decision by the next board meeting. And so we're really excited. There's so many people. We're blessed with a lot of talent here in the community. But otherwise, in the Senate, I know the board reps have a little bit more info. But we've had a great start to the year. Now is kind of the time where we've really been able to reflect on how things have gone. And we've passed multiple bills and donations. I think the most that we're proudest about was to the One America, I believe is what it's called. And it was hurricane relief donations that the Senate was able to raise in the school.
Right.
So we're really proud of that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. So it's been a busy time, and there may not be such a thing as a non-busy time, but meaning that this in the fall is a time for induction ceremonies, it seems, and recognizing students for their academic and service achievements, including our representative here, Cameron. There was a green and white ceremony. There was also, were 200, I'm sorry, how many students were recognized for that?
A lot.
There was a lot.
Yeah.
We were standing there for a long time. It was impressive. So there was that, also Math Honor Society and the Science Honor Society. And it doesn't stop there. With the Reflections program with Northeastern New York, it was a very nice dinner that they host every year for their president and principals. But we also had several students in the district that were recognized, specifically for the Reflections program. Shen definitely shines. We have more students than any other school district in the state represented at the state level receiving awards. But our very own Olivia Stevenson was recognized for the Outstanding Youth Award, and Jennifer Vu as a graduating senior for the Humanitarian Award. So that was pretty exciting. So it just doesn't stop. I also wanted to mention that as of last night, we had the last of a series of Odyssey of the Mind workshops. As many of you know, it's something I'm very passionate about. And I just want to thank a few teachers just really quickly because they're giving up their time in the evening to help teams prepare. They teach them concepts and skills. Specifically, Mr. Al Green from Acadia. He works on art techniques. Mr. Randy Simons, he's a tech teacher, Acadia tech teacher. He works with simple machines, propulsion systems, things like that. Also designed for the FLL team. And Mr. Dave Harrington, he worked on the art presentation workshop. They were amazing, well attended, and I'm so grateful for their service. So I wanted to give a shout out to them. And then lastly, now I know Deanna has an excuse, and Dr. Robinson has an excuse with their walking impediments, their mobile impediments, but the rest of you, Friday is the Veteran Days Dash. I hope to see everybody out. We'll be there. I can't guarantee that I'll be running, but I will be there. I'll walk, but I'll be there. So please come. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Deanna?
Nothing.
Christina?
Talking about the Veterans Day Dash, just also with the Veterans Day coming up, is just to thank all of our servicemen and women for all that they do and sacrifice for us and for our families. I know especially this time when it's Thanksgiving time, we all are very thankful for our families and what we have and what we can provide to our kids, and as board members as well, knowing how fortunate we are to be able to have the education system that we have because of the great freedoms that we have, but again, to thank all of those that have served our country. Also to take a moment to think about the recent Texas church shootings, just to keep those families in that community in our thoughts and prayers as well. Again, just another awful thing that happens, but with all those negative things, there are such other positive things that we see in our own Shen community with our students and how they get involved in this community to provide service to folks that may need help here. So it's always nice to see the good hearts and that there is good folks and, humankind here that are more compassionate. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to follow up on the discussion we had with mental health. I think that's a great way to see where we are on a specific topic and share it with the community, share the insights, learn a lot. And I think at this point as a board, we probably want to think about what we want to talk about moving forward. And I don't have any firm answers, but I think I'd like to get some comments and hopefully over the next few meetings get some feedback, some consensus possibly, what we want to do in the arena of mental health as we progress as a district. A few years ago, we budgeted, I think, maybe $10,000 to just start something with Saratoga services, and I think we're very happy with that. That's one of the impressions I learned. So thank you, Rebecca Carmen. I think you were involved with bringing that forward. And so I think that started things. It definitely seems to be building each year. The biggest surprise for me coming out of it was the percentage of misdiagnosed students. And that, it tells us we're missing something, but I don't think we're different from other schools in the country. I think this is endemic to everybody. But that's probably some area where we could take a leadership role as a school that wants to lead the way in education. I don't know exactly what or how, but I think that's something we want to put on the table for discussing. How do we reduce the percentage of misdiagnosed students? And the challenges were laid out by the speakers, but that's something that I think is food for further discussion.
Bob, let me just ask you a question, because Bob sent me very thoughtful notes on this. And in those notes, you use the term undiagnosed.
Yes, undiagnosed.
Versus misdiagnosed.
Correct.
Are there
From my perspective, it's the same thing. But I think the professionals involved could lead the way and guide us as to what the differences are. And I'm not a professional in this field, but I just left realizing that there's a large percentage of students across the country that are not properly diagnosed. Or diagnosed soon enough, okay? And no matter what's your perspective, if you believe in the loss to each person's life, but also there's a cost to society because we're trying to educate people that aren't ready yet from that perspective. The second thing I left realizing is how important it was not to stigmatize this group of students. And I think this is something we do fairly well at Shen. I've had some discussions where I work with a couple of international parents, and all of them come away explaining that on the first day, our school emphasizes respect, uh, taking care of everybody around you, not stigmatizing your fellow student. And it's amazing when you talk, and I recommend you do this, talk to an international parent and ask them what it's like back home in their school, and they'll say, I don't have anything like that in my school. And they're from very different schools. So I think this is something we lead the way, and we need to keep doing, okay? The third impression, this is the final one. One thing I've seen that works very well within Shen is when we take a look at a national or state or a third-party approach to what we're doing. And when I say third-party, I've always been impressed by how the audits work for us financially, okay? Having somebody come in and look at us and going through that routine really enables us to figure out how to get better and continually to get better. When I look at what we did with counseling, the fact we brought in the RAMP program, so a national standard, okay, a national standard to guide us, because I think in that case, we didn't know what to progress to. You know, there was a lot of internal, doubt or just, we just didn't know. But having a national standard or national rubric, I think works very well in that type of situation. And I think upcoming, we recognize that an award will be coming forward for our transportation team. Again, an example of a national level standard being brought forward, because sometimes we need to have somebody from outside say, this is what you're doing really well, this is what you can get better at. My sense on the mental health arena, we don't have that yet, and it would be worth spending time looking at, what are some of the best practices. We don't have to stick to one, we can look around, we have choices, but I think those things would help us tremendously advancing the cause for mental health. And once again, I don't know everything about this, but I came away realizing there's a couple things that are definitely worth talking about and worth continuing the conversations that we want to continue to progress throughout the year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Gary?
I actually have 2 or 3 things here. First, Cameron and Sheridan set the bar very high for us. They set a high standard, and when you have a successor, I hope that person will be somewhere close to the kind of service you two rendered. I'm very impressed with you, and I hope that we go forward with the kind of representation that you guys have offered. Another comment had to do with Richard Mills. I think I probably was still teaching when Richard Mills was commissioner, and he instituted some accountability and testing standards and so forth at that time, which were kind of in their infancy. And it was not without a certain amount of pushback and resentment and so forth and so on. And in retrospect, with some of the 3 or 4 commissioners that we've had after that, Richard Mills was a very desirable individual. I think they're all well-intended. I think that probably Steiner and his successor were just a little bit too committed to non-public school means of providing public education. And that agenda was not to the best interest of public schools. So that's what I had against that. But Richard Mills, I had an encounter with him on one occasion, and it was polite, but it was tough. And but he was always a gentleman. And I got to know him better after he was retired, because he used to be on the same treadmill next to me at the Y oftentimes. And he really, really was a fine man. What really shocked me about his demise was that he was in far better shape than I am, and 2 or 3 years younger, and all of a sudden, he's gone. And I looked at myself and said, whoa, wait a minute. But he was a good man. He will be missed. He was an asset to public education. He was an asset to this community. The last thing I really wanted to mention, and I don't want to preempt anybody or anything. I know we're talking about the budget and so forth and so on, but I did want to say a few things. mostly as a consequence of NICOS and the document that they set forth relative to the financial conditions and so forth, the environment at the state and the federal level have a pretty good handle on where things potentially could go. But the potential is like a shotgun. There's no particular direct aim. Nobody can really predict exactly how it's going to go. It's probably more up in the air. At this particular point in time, we're getting into the game, shall we say, early, which is the only time you're going to impact it, but it hasn't had a chance to really rise into the public consciousness. And so it sounds like, what are you talking about? Well, we make the effort to be informed so that we can talk, and hopefully people will pay attention. There's always a danger that would be labeled as crying wolf, because so often in the last few years, the situation, not always, but so often, the situation has been not the best in terms of finances for schools. But usually it was a matter of arguing for more money, but not necessarily at the expense of other programs and so forth, who also have their advocates. I think this year, because of the projected state deficit, if we're looking for money, it's going to be a tougher situation, because the pie is definitely not going to be a bigger pie. The projections are smaller. The revenues are smaller. The base upon which those revenues are being drawn is not growing at the rate it was supposed to draw. So consequently, we really have to do a good job. I think the bigger fly in the ointment comes out of Washington, because we're getting all kinds of signals that certain kinds of title money that has been important to us and our ability to render certain services may not be there. And statewide, it's big money. Locally, it's still significant money. And it will be a challenge to continue to do what we do without that available money, if it does in fact not come through. And then, of course, there's diversion of traditional aid money, again, to an agenda to support non-public sources of what would otherwise be public education. And I would like to say I hope that the winds are blowing in a slightly different direction than they were years ago, but in Washington, the winds have not changed as far as I can see. So we have a bit of a challenge. And Bob, I appreciate your comments on the programs that we've started. My own desire would be that we expand our efforts into any area that affects the student's ability to learn and to have the best possible learning environment for each child. If they're coming to school physically ill, we should be able to identify that and help them through that. If they're coming to school because there's malnutrition involved, or they're hungry, they should be fed. And if they have temporary emotional problems, we should have people there to support them. And then, of course, if it's actually something that's diagnosed or can be diagnosed, then we need to be there too. And I know these are areas that perhaps the schools haven't operated to a great extent traditionally, but there are areas where we have to go, because there's so many of our students that fall under those various headings. And it's our job to do the best we can for them. And as you pointed out, when we fail, we don't just fail that child. The whole society pays the cost. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just apologize I was late today. Those are my comments.
I just want to follow up on one comment. Bob referred to the mental health forum, and this was an experiment on our side with piloting a way to better communicate, have an opportunity to communicate with residents, not just as we'll do just in a couple minutes, have received comments from the public, but don't get in a dialogue. We were in a dialogue, and I was very impressed with the transparency of the people who were just laid it out, laid their hearts out, laid their situations out, and the respect that went back and forth on that, and I think it bodes well for us. I think it was a good initiative on our part, and I think we'll be looking toward the spring to do another forum, whether to follow up on the mental health issue, where there were a lot of questions came up, or there are a number of other issues. We'll be taking suggestions on that and look to do some more of that moving forward. So with that, that's all I have tonight. This is a time that we move to public comment. We'll invite our students forward while they're coming forward. I will give the preamble here on public comments. This is an opportunity for the public to address the Board of Education. If there are any residents in attendance who would like to speak, they can do so right after our students. We do have a comment form. The reason we have that form is really to make sure we've got the right name and address and contact information so we can get back to you. The board will not address specific comments, but we remind the residents that the public comment portion of our meeting is only one item on the long agenda. We therefore ask each speaker to be as succinct as possible and that remarks be limited to 2 to 3 minutes. We'd also expect that residents speak in a respectful and courteous manner so as to model proper civility and decorum for our students, and we'll do the same. Residents may also contact the board via boe@shenet.org. All questions come into the Office of Public Information Officer are shared with the board and our superintendent as appropriate. Policy questions, concerns are typically addressed by the board president. Operational questions, concerns are typically addressed by the superintendent or designee. So our students are here.
Hi, I'm Maddie Smith.
I'm Paige Ratsup.
We're from the SFA Senate as well as Camburn Hall, and we're the student representatives. So what we'd like to report is from last time I mentioned a committee that was uprising through the Board of Education, through the SFA Senate, made of students, and through the caucus that we had last time, it rose up and we had a lot of new members, and it went fairly well. Cam headed it, and I helped supervise, as well as Paige has been there in the past. So we've had about 2 meetings, and we changed more to school policies to focus more of our direction onto possible speak outs in the late future and correlate, as well as I know many of the board members attend the speak outs, and we love to have you guys there. So we're trying to get the students information and their petitions or any ideas they have or any complaints to try and better the school, their environment, starting with the students and working our way up. We as well, as I mentioned before, had coffee talks in our next month. Next one will be in about a month or so, talking to the officers earlier today, and we'd love as well for you guys to join us. Coffee talks are more or less a speak out, except we have, it's more of an incentive for students to come because there's free coffee and free food that the SFA Senate provides. Our last one was extremely successful with our class assistant principals in attendance, and we hope to see more in the future.
The Winter Events Committee has been planning our winter event for this year. They're thinking of doing a mystery room activity, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically you get trapped inside a room and you have to work through puzzles to find your way out. They're not sure how interested the students will be yet, so we're going to put out a survey, and we'll see how that goes to see if we should change our idea or not. And also yesterday at our meeting, we finally passed 3 bills, which were all donations from the money we raised for homecoming. So it went to Bountiful Backpack, Captain, and we raised money as a school to donate to One American Appeal, which Sheridan chose because it is nonprofit, and the past 5 presidents have appreciated that donation system. So that's it.
Thank you. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Now I invite any member of the public who would like to speak. We ask you to speak up here at the microphone one because we record it, and we can follow up afterwards. I'll invite anyone who would like to speak. Seeing no one, we'll move forward with the superintendent's report.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Casey. Just a couple of things, comment, rebuttal, if you will, to Mr. Presley's comment, and also the comment about mental health. Mr. Presley is right. Right now, it's a big issue that schools across the nation are wrestling with. Reason why I said I'm on a National Superintendents Association, and we have a conference coming up in February, and one of the big things we're going to talk about is, quite frankly, with you, how, as a national association, we could try to do more advocacy on the federal level, because mental health, while it's popular, it's poorly funded. as a country, and particularly poorly funded in schools because schools are primarily focused on squeezing dollars for academic purposes. But I think your comments echo the sentiments of people saying that that's great. However, if kids aren't prepared to learn, it doesn't matter what you're trying to teach them. So that's one of the things that we're really going to try to do. Similarly, at the state level, we're fortunate. Sometimes being Shen is a benefit and it could be a curse. Because if something happened here, everyone knows. And if something happened here, everyone knows. But we're fortunate because the state recently issued some mandates surrounding mental health. Mrs. Carmen has been working on a committee at the state level as well as collaborating with some local universities, trying to translate mandate into actions, because we know oftentimes you get mandates and then, okay, what do you do with it? How do you fund them? The quintessential unfunded mandate becomes the question where somebody tell you must do this, but okay, what do we sacrifice to do it? So we're very much on the front line as a school district trying to influence what's happening at the state level, and in many ways, a lot of our practices here at Shen are being mimicked, and we think will be mimicked similarly. We saw the same thing with counseling services from some of the things that we did here and now what the state education department is doing. So we're trying to not only do it locally, but try to influence it statewide and nationally as well. And you'll see later on when I talk about our advocacy piece, one of the areas is looking at the whole health and wellness piece and again, trying to influence the legislature, but I'll talk about it a little bit more. Just some dates. We mentioned Veterans Day on Friday. On Thursday at 8:45, the high school is doing their Veterans Day program. Also, 8:50, Chango Elementary School is doing a Veterans Day program. All the schools are doing different things, but these are two that, unfortunately, I can't split myself in two within 5 minutes. I spoke to Mr. Casey already. He said he's planning to be at the high school program. So Mrs. Ford will send a note to Mr. Heckman to let him know that Mr. Casey will be there and he could speak on behalf of the board and the district, because initially they wanted me to do it, but I'd already committed to go to Chango's program because they've invited every year, but unfortunately the schedule didn't allow. But those are two of many things that's happening as a school district. Just a good point of information and neat things. We talk about success of kids. And we have many, many successful kids. And this Thursday is the signing day for athletes. And we have right now about 24 student athletes that will be going from everywhere from Albany to Youngstown State, from the A through Z kind of thing, to kids going to Wisconsin, Syracuse. So a lot of Division I, Division II, a lot of quality places that our young people will be moving on to and taking the Shen spirit with them as they move on. So I'll try to get you a listing in some of the places so you have appreciation of it, of our student athletes and things that they're doing, because they're going to some really, really good schools. I think it's a credit to the entire community. And the last piece I would like to do, wasn't on the agenda. I would like to have Mr. Karam come forward. Again, speaking about as a system, we take pride in trying to do our very best, and I say that there are things and times that we don't hit the mark, and when we don't hit the mark, we're not too prideful to admit that we didn't hit the mark, and subsequently what can we do differently or better to improve. And there are times that we do hit the mark, and when we do, we also like to recognize and share that recognition, because we know that it's no one person that make these things come to a head. It's a collective work and responsibility. So I'll leave that to Mr. Karam to explain the wonderful award we just received.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. So each year, the National Association for Pupil Transportation, or NAPT, selects one transportation department from around the country who applies for the NAPT prestigious Larson Quality Award for excellent customer service and safety practices. So 3.5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to lead and manage your transportation department. And it was clear to me that the department had solid foundations. My focus was to build upon those foundations so that we can continue to deliver quality, safe, and efficient transportation services. Last year, I decided we've done enough renovations for the time being, to our operation, and we go through an outside evaluation process to see where we were still weak and where we are strong. And that process is the NAPT Leland Quality Award Evaluation. The evaluation process is a three-step process consisting of an application, a telephone interview about our operation, which was a very long interview, I might add, I think a couple of hours. And then a 2.5-day unannounced visit where school transportation experts from NAPT inspected every area of our operation. They spoke with school staff, observed our drivers, mechanics, secretaries, bus attendants. They also inspected our policies. Excuse me a second. There we go. They also looked at written procedures and training manual. The process to our team was extremely informative. I would guess that it was almost an 8-month process from the submission of the application phase to the final unannounced visit. So as you can see, we passed each phase, which led to our department being recognized by NAPT. Now, this does not mean that we're going to rest on our laurels. We're going to remain engaged to continue in the process improvement so we can continue to support our students' education. I want to thank you, the board, and the superintendent and the administration team for your support that you've provided the department over the years, and you continue to do so. This award is yours as well as the transportation department, so thank you.
So Al, before you sit down, this is, well, we deal each year with, our teams that end up, down in the legislature, and they get a resolution from the state legislature. So I want to make a resolution tonight and hope the board will support it. So, and I'm making this up on the fly, but I want to make sure, Al, that you carry the message back that, be it resolved that the Board of Education thanks the entire transportation team for its collective effort to rise to the top to be the single rated school in the United States. We thank you and we appreciate it. So can I get a second? All those in favor?
I will absolutely do that, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that indulgence. Wonderful opportunity to be recognized. Just a little segue, I was at University of Albany yesterday speaking to some graduate students who are going into education leadership. And, I thought I'm going to impress them with all these wonderful things. And they all had that look on their face like, until I said, well, let me give you some perspective on Shen. We have 204 buses that go about, and they were like, all of a sudden they got all excited about the buses. And I'm thinking, like, of all the things I've said, that's the only thing that impressed you guys. The fact that we have 204 buses on the road. Okay. So much for being graduate students and brilliant minds. It's impressive. It's an impressive operation, and it's one of those things that I'm always amazed that actually work the way it actually works. Because if you any morning you see it, it's pretty amazing to see things happen and fall in place that they should. So kudos to Al. Related to fall in place, I'm going to have Mrs. Wetmore come forward, unless it's not attached. Oh, okay. So we thought it was attached, but we'll send it to you as a board. Mrs. Wetmore has a copy. So we're in the process now of starting the budget development process, and my apology for it's not being attached for the public. And we have a very, very defined process that we go through, and the reason why it's kind of like, the reason why you have a really good recipe, because every time you do it, you want to make sure that it tastes the same every time. And so we want to go through our process to make sure that at the end of the process that we're coming out with some quality products and services and programs for our students. And so Kathy's just going to walk through very briefly, and I'll make sure that we'll send a copy to the board, as well as attach this to the agenda for future public reference as well.
I I think it's safe to say that the budget process never really ends. It's really a year-long process for us, or an all-year-round process. But officially, on the calendar, we start talking about the budget process in October at the various administrative meetings that we have, and we start looking at the budget expectations, assumptions, and key objectives. And some of those things include like some of the givens, which might be health insurance increases, retirement system increases, some of those things that we don't have control over that we need to take into account. So all of those things we try to compile, as well as what is our focus going to be this next year? Are there some key programs that we're going to be budgeting for and focusing on? So a lot of those things go into some of our assumptions and expectations that then drive the budget process after that. Our next meeting, as you may know, will have the enrollment projections that's done by the Capital District Regional Planning Commission, I'm sorry. They always do a great job for us. So that will also help our budget projections for this next year. During the month of November, we're putting together some of our budgetary forms. Folks are putting together their equipment requests for IMS and the TOPS process. And a lot of work starts happening because the due dates start in January with all of the supply, personnel, and equipment requests. January 1st, I'll say January 1st, sometime at the beginning of January, we get our tax base growth factor from New York State. That's the increase in our tax base that's due to brick and mortar. It's not the appreciation in value of the properties, it's actually the additional property that's being added to the tax roll. So that's one of the given pieces that we use for our tax cap calculation that's due in March. In addition, we start waiting for some of the budgetary information that's coming out of the state. And then also in January, we do start getting all of the non-instructional requests first. We also have the athletic requests coming in the beginning of January. And we also have and this year's going to be new, Clyde Starkey will be going out and meeting with all of the principals to talk about their minor projects and special maintenance needs that they might need in the next year or so. Some of them need more of a lead time or summertime time frame in order to get those things done, as well as budgetary considerations. So we continue to talk internally about budget as we start putting information together. We also start putting together our tax cap information to see sort of magnitude as to what the budget could grow to that we would be able to manage within our tax cap. And then all of the instructional requests start coming in for supplies, equipment, and personnel. Hopefully we're getting more information from the state at that point, but we're also talking about our 5-year textbook plan, programmatic decisions that we're making, as well as our special education needs and some of our projections there. BOCES is a big component of that, not only with the OC-Ed programs, but also with our special education programs too. We spend quite a lot of money with BOCES between IMS and special education. Then when we get to February, the first thing we typically do is we look at our mid-year projection for this year's budget, as well as our 3-year forecast. That kind of gives us an idea of where we stand this year. That gives us kind of a starting point to start building for next year, whether we've gotten, some savings that we can take into consideration or over expenditures that we need to take into account. Again, we're working on the tax levy limit. That gets filed with the state by March 1st. We also get our CPI number, Consumer Price Index number, as well as any other factors that they give to us, which tends to be the ERS and TRS numbers as well. Then after that, we start talking about Board of Education petitions. They become available on March 6th, and they are due by April 16th. I'm sure there's a couple positions that are going to be up. I don't recall off the top of my head. During the month of March, we present both our revenue and expenditure projections. We also present our bus purchase resolution, which Al Karam does a great job with as well. And then the second meeting in March, when we talk about the budget, we adopt our formal notice and propositions for the annual budget that go in the newspaper. Everything is dictated by law. We have to have 4 publications of legal notice at least 45 days before the budget vote, and most of the other deadlines are similarly specific as to number of days and whatnot. So the budget proposal for adoption for the board is April 10th. We also have to have the property tax report card that's due to SED, very structured report that needs to go to SED. That will be approved at the same time we do the budget adoption. April 16th, as I said, the board nominating petitions are due, and we'll be reviewing the budget, publicly at that point, kind of doing our roadshow, going out and talking to all the various PTAs and faculty meetings. April 24th, we have a tentative vote date for the BOCES budget. Every district votes on that on the same date. Then we have some release of public notice, public budget, or popular budget is released to the public 7 days before the budget hearing. Budget hearing is May 8th. That's always the first week in May. And then we send out our budget newsletter based on all the information. Again, a very dictated time frame. And then May 15th is our budget vote, budget referendum. And assuming that we pass, but either way, May 22nd, Board of Education certifies the annual vote. So it happens very quickly. I know it sounds like a lot of dates, but it'll be here before we know it. So, any questions? And we've already sent this out to all the administrators, so everyone's well aware of the deadlines already. So it's well underway.
Thank you, Ken.
So more to come, and the folks here are so brilliant. It's like, asking you shall receive. So I said, where's the budget calendar? Where's it linked? And Kelly worked her magic. And now it's linked. And this is a comprehensive document.
Now we can check what you said.
Yeah. This is a comprehensive document that's there certainly for the board and for the public to review. And if you see a couple of things here that Kathy mentioned, we have people who are responsible for different things. So it's not Kathy putting the budget or me putting the budget. We have a lot of different people at different points responsible for different data sets, different analysis. And what's underlying this that's not there, Dr. Wood spent a lot of time with building principals and academic administrators to talk about instruction and program, because by far the large majority of the budget directly impacts instruction and program. Everything supports the instruction program. So spend a lot of time talking about that and making sure that what we are preserving is worthwhile preserving, what we are enhancing is worthwhile enhancing, and what we're adding is worthwhile adding. And it's once in a while we make those difficult decisions of not preserving certain things because it's simply not meeting the needs. So it's a pretty comprehensive process as well. I just want to briefly talk about lobbying, and ironically we are sitting here on election day. Yeah. And so I just stand to the side here. So each year we start the process a little bit earlier than not, because the executive, I don't want to say necessarily the governor, because necessarily the person, the executive branch has a tendency of hijacking the process and jumping out very early saying what they want, and then the legislature start coming behind and saying, well, if the governor wants this, and we hear it all the time when we go down to the legislative office building, well, we got to see what the governor's office wants. And so it's kind of like, okay, how do we try to influence their thinking early in the process? And so Mr. DeLallo alluded to the New York State Council of School Superintendents. That's the association I'm associated with. We have a collaboration with what they call Education Conference Board. So it's all the different state associations come together. John Yagelski, who was 2 superintendents removed from here, is a chair of that. I'm assuming he's going to continue to be the chair of that. So they try to pull it together so all the different state associations are saying some of the common things and lobbying for some of the common things. I would say not lobbying, advocating, because lobbying is a legal term and I'm not a registered lobbyist, so we don't lobby, we advocate. I have to make sure we use the right terms here, because sometime, a couple years ago, they tried to call us schools on that, saying schools can't lobby. Well, we can advocate, so we advocate for some certain things.
We also don't spread money around.
Yes, we don't have money to spread around for lobbyists. So a couple things I just want to point out, and again, I'm going to be somewhat brief, but enough details. Last year, 2 years back, if you recall, the big funding issue across the state was the gap elimination adjustment. And that stemmed from when David Patterson was governor, and so it's about 10 years now, there was unilateral reduction in state aid to schools to balance the state budget. So at that point, we lost about $9 million in that year. We thought we were just going to lose our minds, but we worked through it and figured it out. So they finally took about 8 years to refund, restore the gap elimination adjustment. Last year, the state committed that they were going to fully fund the foundation aid formula. And this is a formula that's been on the books for New York. This is a great formula. New York is one of the few states that has this great formula. The problem is the formula has never been fully funded because it gets politicized every year. And so they started making the commitment to fully fund it, and so we even got a printout saying that this is the portion that you're getting for current year, and this is what you're supposed to be expecting for next year. It's great, it's on paper, but it's not real until it's real. And so already we're hearing some scuttlebutts that we're not sure if we can actually do what we committed to do, and all this kind of chatter is starting to rise already. The comptroller's office put out a report saying that the state revenues are down, and they're looking at maybe about a 4% deficit, $4 billion deficit in the structural deficit in the state budget. We'll see how those kind of things go. Which is the irony of it, because at the same time, the investment market is at a peak point. So it's kind of interesting to see how those things coincide. So one of the big things we really want to do is try to hold the legislature honest to what they spoke about in their commitments last year and fully funding piece of it. As I mentioned, the state, not only from the comptroller's piece, but this is the interesting piece that we're watching right now at the federal level, the tax reform initiative that's being pushed through. If this notion, what they call people refer to as SALT D, which is the state and local tax deduction, if this happened, New York State in particular will get hurt. Locally. So I put in perspective. People tell you that, keep a mortgage because you can write off your mortgage payment on your taxes. If this goes through, right now the compromise, they're saying, well, maybe we won't eliminate it completely. Maybe we'll put a cap that you can only write off X amount. So if you think about property, you're doing your tax bills. That's a huge expense and a huge deduction that people have. The benefit saying, okay, yeah, I paid it, but it helped mitigate my federal and state income tax. Huge benefit for New York particularly. If that's off the table, so all of a sudden, typical taxpayers saying, well, before I was getting a refund, and now I'm paying more money in my taxes, and it's that darn school's fault, because they're the one that's levying property taxes. So think about how that translates very quickly in a public publicity PR nightmare when places and people start doing taxes and realize they can't. So this is a huge issue, huge financial issue, people personally, and it's a huge issue for us as schools in terms of how do we then have taxpayer support of schools. So I share this with, it's not a political size. I don't care who's doing it. This is a bad decision right now that's on the market. So a lot of people are rallying for it. It's a huge national piece of it. But I wanted to share, this is something that we're going to be sharing with our local folks to say, what are you guys doing? Because our local legislatures aren't talking about this. Well, it's a federal issue. Well, you can use your influence on the federal level as well. I know Congressman Tonko, I ran into him about a week and a half ago. This is a huge advocacy point for him to try to do this, because particularly New York as a state will get hurt significantly with this particular proposition. So we start looking at priorities. The fully funding of the foundation aid is a big piece for us, because we want this. If this happens, this helps truly stabilize some of our budget process for years to come. So this is a big piece that we want to make sure that we can effectively do. The second priority is looking at the tax cap. The tax cap is not about getting the tax cap off the books, but the issue with the tax cap right now is so unpredictable. because every year it's based upon the CPI. And so we're always guessing, is it going to be this percentage or that percentage or this percentage? And so the ability to really plan forward becomes, okay, as Mrs. Wetmore just mentioned, in March, we finally get to see what this tax cap is, and we've been building a budget all the way to that point, and then, oh, okay, the cap is really low, so then we have to start cutting back. Or so it makes it, even within the year sequence, much less long-term sequence of plan. So we want to be able to say to the legislature, come on, guys, you guys have to do something. It's your law. Think about the implication of law. Look at the data in terms of where school taxes and school budgets have gone, and try to come up with something that we can use as a tool for financial planning, and not something that's driving communities crazy because of the inconsistency in how the tax cap plays out. So this is one of those that's, I know it's a sensitive topic to many of our legislators. However, it's something that we hope that we have some common sense conversations about. And so to get to the point of, is 2% 2%, or is it 1.5? Is it 0? Is it 3? What is it? And because the public's always asking us that too. So we always say, well, we don't know. We can't tell you until March. And so that's a difficult conversation to have. So we really want to try to get back in the conversation with them. The third piece of here is the mental health piece I mentioned before. And basically we know that every year, regardless of how much money the state doesn't have, there's always these pet project things that's out there anyway. Because a lot of advocates who with money will advocate for some share of that money. And essentially we're saying that, okay, you know what, instead of sending your money to whatever big advocates, think about mental health as one of those areas to do so. So this is something that we're trying to see if we get a statewide movement, so to speak, to really look at how the state of New York is funding this particularly for schools, and how we can then have collaboration with agencies. Because right now, the big problem we have, places want to do it, but there aren't enough agencies to partner with. I mean, locally you have Saratoga Center for the Family, you have like Parsons. Many places go to Parsons, can we partner with you? Parsons say, we don't have the capacity. We don't have the capacity to partner with you. So, and so the reason why capacity means we don't have the resources to hire other people, and you don't have the resources to hire people, so the partnership is not going to materialize. So we really want to try to see if we get some momentum on this piece as a funded priority as we move forward. And then the last piece of it is something that there's an employee retirement system now that's controlled by the state comptroller's office, a reserve that's been on the books for a long time, and we have taken advantage of as a school system to use as a planning tool. And so now there's a push to get a similar reserve for the teacher retirement system. So again, it's a planning sequence to be able to, when opportunities present itself, to create reserves so we can minimize the cost impact. Because the last thing that we wanted, we went through this a couple of years, where when rates rise in the market, that what they call that big depression market 6 years ago, when rates rise, it becomes a question of, okay, we can't not pay our TRS, our pension costs, because that's a mandatory cost, so therefore we have to cut something else. Versus if we have a mechanism to say, we're not going to wait till the doom, we want to try to plan ahead. And so the big piece of it is, how do we try to plan ahead to avoid those situations of compromising academic programs for pension-related costs or otherwise, because we have some capacity now, and we do a very good job of using reserves as a mechanism to avoid spikes in taxes, but more important as a mechanism to avoid reductions in program services to kids. And so this is something that we want to try to advocate for. Ironically, the biggest pushback is coming from Long Island, which is kind of an interesting place, because in many cases that's an area that school districts can use any release to try to minimize the amount of the fluctuation in property taxes, particularly on Long Island, where it's all over the place and very high. So this is one that we want to push on the table as well. So we always put some numbers to say what we're doing as a system. We can't say do for us, and we're not doing for ourselves. And I think as a system, our budgets have been fluctuating around 2.3. The high now is, 5-year average is 2.3, because we had a high 5 years ago. High was 3.5%. Take that out of the sequence, this 5-year average falls about 1.5. So we try to really show that as a school community, we try to balance the budget in a very effective way. We certainly per pupil cost. This is one of those kind of things that is kind of a mixed bag. We don't want to brag that we have the lowest per pupil cost, because we're not providing program services. I think we do a great job of providing program services in a very sensible way, and therefore the appropriate costs reflect some of those type things as we move forward. So our goal is after the election today and see how things pan out and see if there's any implication as a result of today's election. And unfortunately, most people wait till after Thanksgiving to talk because apparently I guess people don't work the couple weeks before Thanksgiving or the couple of weeks before Christmas. So we're going to hope that first week of December to start reaching out to our legislative folks once we come back in the session in January to try to set up some time for the board to go down and start having conversation with our legislative representatives, state representatives, and hopefully try to influence the state process as much as we can. And so this is a conversation that a lot of superintendents are starting to have because we realize that if our voices aren't heard, there's no one else advocating for schools in a very comprehensive way. We have a lot of people advocating for their very specific niche things, but not in a very comprehensive way, because everything we talk about here is how do we ensure quality program services for Shen as a school district, not any one particular area of Shen, but Shen as a school district. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
You mentioned several things that I thought really are worthwhile talking about. The tax levy cap in our recent state school board convention, there were a couple of resolutions up on that. And I really thought that they were impractical resolutions. One talked about eliminating it. Another one talked about essentially making the 2%, which is the nominal cap, a minimum, which in a sense would make it the floor, and it could go above. In other words, there would no longer be a cap. So it made absolutely no sense. The approach here of trying to stabilize the amount that we can expect at a consistent 2%, not subject to the cost of living adjustment, just that makes sense. In real politic, if you go to the assembly, the assemblyman will say, well, the teachers' organization is for this or that. And that makes a big difference. But guess what? The teachers' organization is on the same side we are on this, but it ain't going to make any difference unless it's something they feel that they can do. Because this is probably, the tax levy cap is probably one of the most universally popular things that the state legislature has done in years and years and years. So they're not prone to do anything to really weaken it. But I do think that they might be receptive to the approach that we're talking about here. That is, we'll make it consistent. We're still talking about a cap. It's just not a variable cap, and it makes all the difference. As far as the TRS.
Yeah, we don't want to deal with that agency.
I was going to get into IRS, but as far as TRS reserve was concerned, this was something that we tried a few years ago and got a resolution passed, but it didn't take the right approach. Again, the approach is everything. We're talking about having the reserve for the very same reasons that we're talking about now, stabilizing costs. You have a reserve when contributions go down, and you draw on it when the contribution rate goes up. So the impact remains relatively stable. The one we had was we're going to have the state retain additional amounts of money in a reserve over and above their actuary obligation to meet retirement costs. And nobody trusts the state, and rightfully so, because if they have their hands, can get their hands on the money, they'll probably spend it. So it's to leave it in the school district's hands make infinitely more sense. The last thing that you talked about, and I'm glad you mentioned it, was I'll borrow a term from the finance investment people. They talk about being risk adverse. We have tax adverse. And what they were talking about with the changes in the tax structure, not being able to write off your mortgage interest, not being able to write off your state income tax, not being able to write off your local property tax, all of these things will make a real impact on people, particularly in this state, because two of them are unique to New York, because there aren't that many states that have a provision such as the ones that we have. And there are only, I guess there are only about 4 or 5 states where they're actually a state income tax, or the state income tax. And consequently, that's really big for us. But the bottom line is that, you know, if you're going to have to pay more in one place, people are not going to be as receptive to paying in another place. They're going to go where they can have some control. And where do they have control? Well, they have a vote over our budget and allocations, and that's where it could be felt. So obviously, it could be not only personally adverse, but it could be adverse to activities and what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, what you had on there for the mental health piece, I think that has a lot of potential. If there are other groups that we're trying to work with, you know, we as a board are going to advocate, you know, our position on this, but that creates an opportunity for some other groups to perhaps, you know, tie into us. Perhaps we'd want to, you know, have an advocacy campaign to other groups, if that makes sense. We're going to ask some of these other groups to come and be guest speakers. This might be good as a part 2 forum. If we're going to get deeper into addressing what we talked in the first forum, that might be worth looking at.
Any other comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to going to Albany and doing the annual run. And Mrs. Carmen is approaching the bench here. First reading.
Good evening. So you have a group of policies in front of you. You have copies of that went to October's policy review meeting, and we are putting them forth for first reading tonight. Most of them you will see are personnel ones, which I had indicated before that the next few months are a lot of personnel ones that we are reviewing. So, any questions
or comments on those? And it certainly can, before we come back, we will see these again for action later in the month, I think, right? Or at the beginning of
next month. Beginning of next month.
So we have, so we have 30 days to look at this. Yeah, Cameron.
As it relates to some of the policies regarding animals in schools, I think as we learned in our mental health forum and discussion of how some of those animals brought into the school, how they can help comfort students. There you go. I think that's the perfect word. And so I just think that's a wonderful idea, and we hope to see that further brought about at all the school levels.
So I just want to make sure we clarify for the public. Mrs. Carmen said these are personnel policies, but yet we're talking about animals in classrooms. We're not referring to the personnel as animals. There's one policy that's there as pets. So we just start, when I'm listening to the words and not looking at that, it sounds as if, wow, that's an awful group of people. We're talking about actual pets, and there's a policy that deals with that. The rest of the policies are personnel related. So I just want to make sure that for the listening public, that we're not referring to personnel as animals. So thank you.
And Cameron, you know, that's one that, you know, on the surface, it sounds like a great thing, but there's also all kinds of landmines on that one, and it's clearly something that we need in policy. We need to set what the framework is, because you know, what starts out as a good idea has an unintended consequence, and everybody decides, well, my son is a little off today, and if you could just bring, you know, a little Max in with him, there wouldn't be any issue. And so this is one where sometimes we're the bad guy on this one, but I think our school people have been very supportive of using animals in the school in the proper environment and you know, under following the policy rules. And
in regards to what has been done so far, you know, I think it's been very
it's beneficial.
Good. Thank you. Okay, we'll see you again later in the agenda, in fact. We'll move on to consent items. Normally I combine them, but I think, Christina, so let's have, can we have a motion to accept the treasurer's report? Bob, second, Deanna, all those in favor? Treasurer's report's accepted, and then we'll break the minutes up, October 10th minutes. Have a motion to accept it. Christina, second on that. Gary, all those in favor? Motion's carried. And then the October 24th Can I have a motion on that? Thank you, Todd. Bob? All those in favor? And we have one abstaining, right? Okay, 6-1 on that. We'll move on to our business items. We have an election coming up, special election on December 5th, and for two resolutions, one dealing with the land sale and the second dealing with the capital fund. So we need to appoint chief inspector and inspectors of the elections. So can I have a motion on item number 1? Deanna, second Bob. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Motion carries. Every year we approve funding and handling of classroom accounts. So motion 2 deals with approval of the clubs and the classroom accounts for 2017, 2018. Christina, second. Naomi, any questions or comments?
I do have a question for Kathy. Kathy, I noticed that some of them do not have treasurers. Is it appropriate for them not to have a treasurer? Is that okay, or?
Tell Kathy to come up. Kathy, can you come up, please?
Sorry.
I think in some cases, they haven't had time to elect treasurers yet because
Okay.
they're just pulling the clubs together in the
Okay.
membership.
All
So
right.
to be determined, I guess, is a better term.
Okay. Do you have a set time that they?
Well, if they don't have a treasurer, then they
Fine.
can't sign
That's fine.
disposable
Okay, I just
orders
wanna
or
make
any
sure.
of that
All right.
things.
There's an incentive for them to do
Okay,
it.
good. All right, just want to make sure.
Any other questions? All those in favor? Motion carries. Third item is bids or recap tires, football equipment reconditioning, and natural gas. Can I have a motion on that? Todd, second. Bob? Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
I did have a
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Do we vote? Or
No, go ahead, go ahead.
No, it had to do with the one on the tires, the cap tires. I just know, with the one that had to do with the football services, I noticed there were several districts that were included that would maximize the benefit. And I noticed that the one with the tires, it was only Bethlehem, and I didn't know why that was.
Well, I mean, part of it, we look at the magnitude of our use and then also who the best people to collaborate with, not on the type of tires and things of that nature. I mean, quite frankly, we could probably go alone and get similar pricing. We have the benefit of some organizations, and we have the benefit of Bethlehem with the former transportation person is now
Oh,
our
that
current
happens to be
transportation
there?
person.
Okay.
And so it's a matter of brand. I mean, some people may buy X brand for their vehicle, and that's not the brand that we use. And so one of the things that we also try to do is that try to be consistent to certain products that we think are better than not, and then try to collaborate with some of those parties that might be doing so. But typically, we do this kind of bid on our own because of the sheer magnitude that we can do.
Yep.
And then the football thing is the suburban council piece that started several years ago
Well,
to get into a cycle of reconditioning.
And that one did make sense. I mean, there were several districts collaborating with Shen
Yeah.
on that one, so I would just wonder why there wasn't a similar arrangement with the other one, the second one.
All those in
That was it.
favor? Motion carries. Item 4, certification of uncollected taxes. Can I have a motion on that? Naomi, second. Bob? Questions or comments? All those in favor? That motion carries. So on that one, we're going to pass around, we have to provide a signed certification signed by each of the board members for the 6 towns that we're involved in. So we'll sign, and that'll be the paper moving around as soon as we get to a point that we can do that. Next is contracted services for an agreement with Captain over multiple services that they provide. Can I have a motion on that? Christina, a second. Naomi, any questions or comments? All those in favor? Motion carries. Item 6, external audit corrective action plan. Remember, we had our external audit. They were here. They had some comments. Naomi has experience in doing auditing at the state level, and what I know this because I was audited several times on the other side. What the auditors always want to hear when they get done, they make their comments. They want to hear the district concurs, and for each of the, I think there's 5 or 6 items here that were shown exceptions that they wanted to call out to us. And in each case, if this plan says the district concurs and here's what we're going to do, and we lay not only saying what we're going to do, but we assign responsibility for it. So this is the right thing to do. Let me see, did we get a motion on that? I don't think we did. Naomi, second, Bob. All those in favor? Motion carries. We have a couple here, 7 and 8, health service contracts and private school placements. Can I get a motion on 7 and 8 together? Todd, second, Bob.
I do have
Yes.
a question. So I am curious about whether this was an increase or decrease over prior years, as far as it's talking about identifying the school districts that we can either provide services to, for whether it's health services or whether it's tuition. I think the private school placements. And so I was just curious, what is the trend? Which way are we going on this?
I mean, we can get you the numbers, but they're very distinct things. So the health service contracts are places that we currently have. So we're paying these school districts because we have resident students somewhere in the district for certain health. So that's by law. There's a formula that the numbers come out. Our numbers, I mean, ironically, quite frankly, are relatively small when you think about the population that we have. The private placement piece is a direct, and I'm not sure, Mrs. Marlowe, if you want to come forward, if you have any sense of the trends that we have. Over the years, we have done more to minimize hours. However, you have some of these, the private school placements. So in other words, it's parents who are sending their kids to private school. We have, I don't know, Mr. Miller, probably about 900 kids in private parochial schools across the district, and that trend has been relatively flat over the years. We always say that if we get those 900 kids back, we'll have some internal problems, because we'll be over 11,000 kids on campus, on schools. So that's not a bad thing in some sense, but those numbers have been relatively flat. We've seen some decrease with the economy. The economy goes down, people bring the kids back to public school. The economy goes up, some people bring the kids back to private school. But I would say for the most part, we're relatively flat.
So I was curious, and I'm glad you're coming up, if it was placement because of special needs.
Yes.
That type of thing. Yes.
And when you look at the 611 and 619 grant, we have a mandated section and that is also a formula from the state.
Yeah.
It says exactly how much we have to pay to each of those schools.
Okay, and is it more? And I was expecting, I realized that these are not the same types of contracts, so I'm assuming that, and maybe incorrectly, but it'd be the ones with special needs that you would have a greater need for like the health services, for specifically.
There is.
Yeah, not necessarily.
There's no correlation there?
Right.
No.
Okay.
But I mean, certainly, we have the information. But the bottom line, it's not a huge number.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen, because it's not a large number, even if it's, plus or minus 1 or 2, it's not a huge fluctuation.
Okay. And you see where I'm going. I was just curious, how many are going outside of the district to get services that they can't necessarily get here?
They don't, the students in these schools are parentally placed by their parents because they want them to go to private school.
Yeah, and they have special
So
education
it's
needs.
not-
It has nothing to do
that.
with special education.
Okay. And on the health services contract, that too?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Move on to rental agreement with SPAC. It's a great time going up there in June, and we're going, I think, June 21st this year. But it does cost the district over $8,000 to use that venue. It's the only one that can handle this.
So it's the 22nd, by the way, for all those people who planning graduation. They're going to 21st.
22nd? Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't look up. Can I have a motion to approve the rental agreement? Christina, second, Bob. All those in favor?
Just one comment?
Yes.
Fans.
Oh, yes.
Fans.
Trust me,
Fans.
you're talking about, you're not
On
talking
the
about
stage.
people clapping, you're
Fans.
talking
No, we're gonna have a lot
about
of
blowing
fans.
air
We
on the
need
stage.
blowing
so
air
yeah, okay,
fans.
yeah. That are low temperature. We move on to item 10, scholarships and local grant donations. Can I have a motion to accept those with appreciation?
Yep.
Naomi, second. Deanna?
And
All those in
thanks-
favor?
Thanks
Come.
to
Yes,
Karen's kids, once again, huge.
absolutely.
Bradfield.
Yeah. All those in favor? Motion carries. And then the last of the business items, we have bond refunding. As I recall, this provides us with about $21,000 a year and reduced cost by refunding a couple bonds that we have out there. Can I have a motion? Deanna, second Bob. Any questions?
I do have a question with this one. So is this another one of these legislative uncertainties, meaning that,
Well, right now, this is a federal issue, so we're watching the federal, there's laws being passed that will go into effect that will prevent some of this refinancing piece of it, and so quite frankly, we're just trying to get ahead of the deadline.
right,
By having the financing.
by the end of
Yeah,
December?
yeah.
And so if it does go through, then you're saying, then going forward, we could not take advantage of
Not this
refinancing?
type of, not this type of financing.
This type of refinancing,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Understood, thank you.
Okay. All those in favor? Motion carries. Move back to students and acceptance of the special education placements. Can I have a motion on that? Christina? Second, Todd? Any questions? Yeah. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Mrs. Bush is up here. She's got 3 items that we've got grouped together. Approval of staffing recommendations, approval of transportation recommendations, and a resolution of certification of lead evaluators.
Yes, so I would like to just recognize 3 retirements that we have. Paul Kravitz is retiring after 15 years as a secondary school monitor at the high school. Michelle Fazio retiring after 22 years, computer lab aide in the high school. And Jay Tortolot, retirement after 35 years, director of operations, retiring in January.
That's amazing.
Any questions on the appointments or these 3 items together? Can I have a motion? Bob, second. Naomi, I saw your hand go up. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And we're back to second reading. This is for approval.
Any questions regarding the second reading for tonight?
Could I have a motion to approve policies and procedures, second reading? Todd, second. Bob? All those in favor? Motion carries.
And just a point of note, we have policy review tomorrow.
Yes.
I'll be absent from that, but we will
I
still
may be
commence.
too, but you'll be there.
Mr.
Great.
Press will be there.
Okay.
So you'll be there with Mrs. Carmen. Congratulations.
Yeah. So we move on to a second opportunity for the public. If anyone from the public would like to comment, now would be appropriate. Seeing none, we have, before we adjourn, I do want to recognize here, we can't let Mrs. Rajat, sneak under the radar. I would be surprised if Mrs. Rajat was at our next meeting, which is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. She's the Director of Development for Equinox, and I'm going to put you on the spot, Christina. How many meals do you guys serve, Thanksgiving meals? I had written down 10,000. Is that right?
That's
10,000,
yes.
wow. Well, that's a tremendous community effort, and that's certainly an excusable absence from missing
I
the board
appreciate that.
board meeting. So we encourage anybody who hasn't supported this in the past. It's a great event, and it requires a lot of support to pull all this together. How many turkeys do you?
We unloaded them today, 824 turkeys, 13,000 pounds, but we're very fortunate. This Capital Region community raises every year, and we have about 3,500 volunteers. That makes it possible because we have a very small staff, so the volunteers are key to our success in this community. So I want to thank you for mentioning that, although it's a very personal thing. I appreciate that support. But and also Shen has been very involved in many occasions, volunteers as well as not only administrators and teachers and staff, but also students. And we have many clubs that will also make Thanksgiving cards because every meal that's delivered, the recipient also receives a Thanksgiving card as well in addition to the meals. So it's pretty neat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to adjournment. Just before we get a motion on that, a reminder that our next meeting is Tuesday, November 21st. It's the 2 nights before Thanksgiving, and we, as was mentioned earlier, we'll be receiving our enrollment projections from the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. Always an important base from which we start on our budgeting effort. And then on December 5th, our next business meeting. The same day, we're holding the special election for the 2 resolutions that we mentioned earlier. So I just want to call those out. And we'll be able to finish this meeting in time. If anybody hasn't voted and still wants to go vote, they can do it today. So can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting? Bob, second. Naomi, all those in favor?
Absolutely.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.